Okay, thanks, Theo. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's PRASEG seminar, which is the fourth of six webinars that's been organised. Today's is a national energy efficiency strategy for sustainable recovery. In general, the webinars are all looking at a green recovery and how we move forward post-COVID-19. We've got an expert panel with us, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them. PRASEG also is a cross-party group, so we'll all work together. But in terms of cross-party workings, I have to say or pay tribute to one of our vice chairs, Baroness Maddock, who sadly passed away on Friday, 26th of June. So on that, just to pay proper tribute to Diana Maddock, I'd like to ask Lord Andrew Stunnell to say a few words on behalf of the group, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. It is a sad moment, particularly for those of us who knew Diana personally. And her loss, I think, is serious, not just for those who took the whole policy area of energy efficiency very seriously, which she very certainly did, but also many friends in other areas where she campaigned tirelessly for many years. But I don't think we should be too downhearted. I think all of us who knew Diana knew her to be somebody who was very cheerful, very charming, very persistent, very determined, a very good all-round person who it was a pleasure to meet and to have conversations with. And I think that's how she would want to be remembered by those of us who knew her well. She was certainly committed to the causes she believed in. And fuel poverty is probably what started her off. She was a resident in Southampton, and she was concerned about the problems of fuel poverty faced by people in her local community. She became an active Liberal Democrat. She campaigned, she got elected to Southampton City Council in 1984, actually, and that's when I first met Diana professionally, as you might say, because at that time she was the leader of the Liberal Democrat group in Southampton, and I was the leader of a Liberal Democrat group in Cheshire County, Cheshire County Council, and there was a kind of a camaraderie amongst those of us who were what was called in the balance of power, where no party had overall control. And Diana used her influence in Southampton on the council to develop energy poverty, fuel poverty strategies for the council, and incidentally worked quite closely with Alan Whitehead, who I think has been a PRASEG member for a long time. She campaigned very heavily for the Liberal Democrats, and I remember in the run-up to elections now long distant in Hampshire that she was the person who could winkle candidates out of nowhere, get them trained and show them what they had to do to get elected. So she was a formidable campaigner, not just on energy policy, but also on getting success for Liberal Democrats. And in that sphere, of course, when there was a by-election in the nearby constituency of Christchurch, nearby to Southampton, that is, I remember that she phoned me up one night I was in Cheshire, of course, to say to me, well, she'd seen the candidates who were putting themselves forward, and she knew all the great and the good and all the not so great and the not so good who might have been interested, and she was somewhat dismayed that the choice that the Liberal Democrats had in front of them didn't look all that good. And I remember saying to her, Diana, why is it you're not candidate for Christchurch? And she had, of course, the usual dozen reasons why she couldn't be: her family, her capacity, etc. But to cut a long story short, she evidently thought about that and did put herself forward and stood in the Christchurch by-election and was successfully elected. And of course, the rest, you could say, is history. And what she did, of course, in her 4 years in the Commons and her 23 years in the House of Lords was remarkable in its own right. And I'm sure she would say the highlight of her parliamentary career was getting the Home Energy Conservation Act onto the statute book in 1995. And all of her work since then has been pushing in the same direction to see fuel poverty tackled, energy efficiency tackled, and of course, as I know well, she was absolutely tireless in trying to achieve that through parliamentary means, campaigning with NGOs, and of course working with PRASEG and others to push in an all-party direction as often as she could. And I know that in the post-coronavirus world, she was already beginning to think about how, coming out of the coronavirus world, energy efficiency could be a source of employment, a way of reducing fuel poverty, and of course, a way of meeting the United Kingdom's carbon energy targets. Now, I'm sure that PRASEG and those who are in it will remember Diana with affection. I'm absolutely sure that her loss won't lead to any less pressure and impetus from you and other parliamentarians to make sure that the policy area, which is something that was so close to her heart and that she believed in so passionately, shouldn't in any way get sidelined, and indeed is a real opportunity at the present time. And I'm sure that she would see a good outcome from that initiative post-coronavirus as perhaps her best legacy in the current circumstances. And I suppose I can't possibly stop without saying that she was also a keen supporter of the bill from Lord Foster, which is coming along now, the Domestic Premises Energy Performance Bill, and is another sign of the fact that, that Diana was absolutely tireless and remorseless in her campaign. She's going to be a really sad loss for the Liberal Democrats. I'm sure she'll be a really sad loss for many of those who worked with her as in the NGO department and cross-party to get energy efficiency higher up the political agenda, and not just up the agenda, but actual results. She will be a sad loss, but I think we should remember as a very cheerful and determined campaigner and resolve to follow in her footsteps. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for those remarks. It's quite obvious from what you say, Diana's certainly left a mark in terms of having introduced legislation, obviously her campaigning, and clearly a very important member of the Liberal Democrats as well, and left a mark in the party. So thanks for that tribute. As you say, obviously she wouldn't want the aspects of energy efficiency and sustainable recovery to be derailed. So that certainly does at least take us nicely on to what today's seminar is going to be all about. Now, I'm quite sure everybody that joins in today will probably all start with a predetermined position anyway, that we believe in the substance of a national energy efficiency strategy. So I think the key thing is how do we deliver that message to make sure the UK government takes it on board. Now, pre-meeting notes, I've got mentions of the fact that with the Prime Minister's speech in post-COVID-19 economic recovery on Tuesday this week, where the Prime Minister's theme seemed to be build, 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 but clearly that doesn't then tap into the actual aspect of energy efficiency. So we have a hope that maybe in July the 8th that there could be announcements in terms of future funding for energy efficiency policy. But I remain to be convinced myself that we're going to see that in the short term, but certainly short to medium term, we do need to see moves towards a national energy efficiency strategy from my perspective. You know, if you look, mentioned there about Diana tackling fuel poverty, quite clearly energy efficiency is one tool to tackle fuel poverty. Research by the UK Energy Research Centre estimates that if we get all properties to energy performance certification band C, that will actually reduce energy demand by 25%. So again, that's massive going forward in terms of decarbonisation agenda. Some people might have seen Peace Committee this morning had a session with the Committee on Climate Change in terms of the progress report just published. And again, the Committee on Climate Change make it clear energy efficiency is a central plank towards the net zero target of 2050. And if I quote the chair of the Peace Committee this morning, he said, it's blindingly obvious we need to do that. So I suppose I'm setting out probably what you say is my prejudiced viewpoint in favour of it. I suspect we all are as well, as I said. So I'll just quickly introduce the speakers that are going to be speaking to this, and then I'll hand over to them to say opening remarks, and then we can move forward to questions. So first, we've got Michael Lewis, who's the Chief Executive from E.ON UK, who joined E.ON as Chief Executive Officer in 2017, had a number of senior executive roles within E.ON, and obviously very much an expert in terms of renewables and climate change. We've got Julia Harrigan, Chief Executive Officer of the UK Green Building Council. So she's been Chief Executive there since 2015, been credited with transforming strategy into a more member-focused holistic approach in terms of the sustainability agenda. Tom Burke, who's co-founder and chairman of E3G, which is third generation environmentalism. He's a visiting professor at both Imperial and University Colleges London. And also the fourth member of the panel is Ross Armstrong. Is Chief Executive Officer of OneWorks. They're based in Scotland with end-to-end responsibility for the OneWorks business. And basically, it's a massive programme of $2 billion of contract revenue that OneWorks are doing in terms of energy efficiency installation. So I'll ask each panelist in turn to make their opening remarks. And if we can maybe focus on thinking about why should we have a national energy efficiency strategy, how should we do it, and what can we learn from previous initiatives. So I'll hand over to Michael Lewis first. Michael, if you want to kick off, maybe limit remarks to 3 or 4 minutes, please.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, and good afternoon, everybody. I think you've set out very clearly why energy efficiency is so important. I won't rehearse all of the statistics. I would only say this is the lowest, or what I used to call the lowest of the low-hanging fruits, but somebody actually corrected me and said it's not hanging, it's lying on the ground waiting to be picked up. This is the biggest single best investment that UK PLC can make. It not only provides jobs, which are absolutely critical, and they're shovel-ready jobs right now. It provides lower bills for consumers, the equivalent of 2 pence off income tax. It provides benefits in terms of better homes and better health outcomes, and of course, significantly lower emissions. And heating in homes is one of the biggest emitters of CO2 now. And so when you add all that together, there's around about 47 billion net present value benefit for the UK economy. And this is something which we absolutely have to do in the short term as one of the policy measures to drive us out of the COVID crisis, but also in the medium term, it's absolutely critical for delivering net zero. So the question arises, if all of those things are true, we know what to do, we know how to do it, we know the very significant benefits of doing it. The question rises, why hasn't it happened? Why are we still having this debate every year, it seems? And I think the only answer I can come up with is there has been a big policy failure in this area, and that's lasted for many, many years. And now we have an opportunity to rectify that. And I think the Green Deal is something that's always cited as a failure, and it was indeed a failure. And then we have to ask the question, why didn't it work? And I think the most important point to make on that is it didn't put the customer, the consumer of energy, at the heart of it. And that's where we need to now go in order to make this happen. And maybe just a personal anecdote about my own experience. I lived in Germany for many, many years, and obviously Germany has had a huge amount of focus given the so-called Energiewende, the switch away from fossil and nuclear towards renewables. They haven't got everything right, by the way, I hasten to add. You know, German energy policy is not an example for everyone, but one thing they did get very, very right was around energy efficiency. My own personal experience was when I moved to Germany, I was surprised how new everything looked. And of course, there's one obvious reason for that, the rebuilding after the Second World War. But there was more than that. And I didn't realize the reason why until I bought a house myself, which was a 1950s house. And when I got a loan, a mortgage from Commerzbank, they also insisted I take a loan from the KfW, German Development Bank, to fund energy efficiency measures. And that was about 10% of the total value and 250 basis points lower interest than the commercial loan I got from Commerzbank. And I didn't have to worry about arranging it all. They did all the arranging. And what did I do with that? Well, you have to get an expert in to assess what needs to be done. And that entailed new boiler, solar thermal on the roof, new energy efficient windows, and external wall insulation. And the total package meant that my energy bills, my energy consumption fell considerably. And then I realized why everything looked new in Germany, because you knock on the external wall insulation and it's all hollow because it's insulation, but everything looks brand new. So my 1950s house was transformed into a brand new house. And if you ever are in Germany, and when we can travel again, try knocking on a few facades as you walk down the road, and you'll see they're hollow. Because even if they look brick, it's probably external wall insulation to insulate the home. And Germany's had a real success, and in some ways it's offset the very expensive price they pay for electricity because their renewable subsidies are very, very high. But the unit cost of electricity is very, very high, but the consumption is much lower because of the energy efficiency measures. So I think that's something we can definitely learn from the whole KfW experience, and it's been tremendously successful in driving private investment. So in terms of future policy, I think the most important thing in the first instance is use the mechanisms we already have. So we already have the eco scheme in place. It's not perfect, but it's there. It can be upscaled quickly. We know the demand is there. We've put out a tender recently for eco, which was oversubscribed. So there's demand there, the supply chain is there, it can be turned on very, very quickly. And we've delivered over 1.3 million energy efficiency measures over the last 12 years, predominantly using eco. We also know the Warm Homes Fund is a very effective measure. That's currently 150 million. And we're doing numerous homes, around 1,000 in Staffordshire under the Warm Homes Fund. So another mechanism that can be ramped up. There's also the home upgrade grants that was in the Conservative manifesto, 2.5 billion for that. We think that should be doubled to get $1 billion a year over the next 5 years to really drive the uptake of energy efficiency and heat pumps in those homes where it's most needed, i.e. targeting the fuel poor. But also in the medium term, we have to get the able to pay market working. I mean, all of those mechanisms, eco, Warm Homes Fund, home upgrade grants, they're all about the fuel poor. We need to get the able to pay market working because that's 89% of homes, 11% are in fuel poverty. And that means bringing in mechanisms like I mentioned with the KfW, some kind of green mortgage where we can marshal billions, literally billions. And the number for the KfW is around 260 billion invested over the period 2007 to 2017. And for every euro of public money, 6 euros of private money has been invested. And also over the medium term, it means aligning tax incentives. That means things like council tax holidays, differential council tax bans for more energy efficient homes, zero rate VAT on energy efficiency measures, and a complete review of stamp duty where measures for energy efficiency are taken. So those are the key things we need to do over the medium term to get people focused on energy efficiency and investing their own money as well as public money. And as I said, come back to the beginning, the net present value for UK PLC is enormous. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. It's a good opening, Michael. Julie, do you want to give your opening remarks, please, as well?
Yeah, sure. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak to you today. I guess this is an issue very close to our heart at the UK Green Building Council. We've long since been campaigning for energy efficiency and retrofitting the existing stock. Indeed, we've been calling for energy efficiency to be recognised as a national infrastructure priority, to give it the sort of the capital spend that it requires, and to recognise it as a massive opportunity. So our members at UKGBC are businesses that largely span the whole of the property and construction value chain, and they really mostly stand ready to deliver energy efficiency at scale. Many of them have really fantastic examples already of having achieved high standards of efficiency, whether that's in new or existing buildings, both homes and commercial. And so there is, there's a lot of sort of proof and evidence out there that this is eminently feasible. And I have to say I've been hugely encouraged to witness in the last few months alone, just the sheer exponential focus on this topic with organisations as far and wide as the CBI, the Committee on Climate Change, of course, the Green Finance Institute, big NGOs like WWF, IPPR, UK 100, all and many, many more, calling for priority action in this area, in this economic recovery period. So the list just keeps on growing every day, and I think Mike's absolutely right in terms of, the case has been built. I guess for me, the most succinct reason why this is so important now, and why all of those bodies and ourselves are so focused on the urgency of the issue, is because, and this was captured very well by a paper that was published in May by the Oxford Smith School of Enterprise and Environment, with contributions from Lord Stern, Joseph Stiglitz, and various others. So they looked at more than 700 economic recovery stimulus measures, and they evaluated those against both the economic growth potential and its sort of decarbonisation potential, and overwhelmingly in general found that greenhouse gas mitigating policies create more jobs, drive higher short-term returns, and increase long-term cost savings. But one of the top 5 most impactful policies that that emerged from that study was, from both an economic multiplier point of view and a decarbonisation point of view, I hasten to add, was really investing much more heavily in building energy efficiency, spending on renovations and retrofits, including improved insulation, heating systems, domestic energy storage, and so on. So the case is there, and as as has already been said, what we need to focus on is the how. How should we do it? I think there's a very clear case that we should prioritise social housing, and clearly the government plays a big role there in terms of incentivising and enabling social landlords to take action. The National Infrastructure Commission recognised this and recommended in their earlier assessment that the 3.8 billion pounds of grant or government grant or direct funding be allocated to energy efficiency improvements in social housing between now and 2030. And that is consistent with the commitment within the Conservative manifesto, the 3.8 billion pound social housing decarbonisation fund. We think that should be brought forward immediately. It needs to start being allocated and spent right now. And we can come back to that when we're talking about jobs and the importance of a pipeline there. But that really needs to go hand in hand with the accelerated sort of deployment and front loading of many of the other manifesto commitments, like the Home Upgrades Grant and the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme and various others, but also many more incentives for the able to pay and owner-occupier section of residential homes. So also additional funding on training schemes will be really, really critical to increase the skills and sort of readiness of the supply chain to deliver this. And then finally, just reflecting on the lessons learned piece, I think it's really, really crucial here that any stimulus package avoids the pitfalls that we've experienced in the past of stop-start policy, and in particular thinking about this sort of boom and bust of the largely SME actually parts of the construction supply chain who have really struggled with that. We need long-term policy clarity and consistency, and we need firm foundations now for particularly on the owner-occupier side of things, for which could be quite self-sustaining, for focusing on driving up consumer demand. I think on the observations around the Green Deal, making the finance available is just one part of it, but actually incentivizing people to draw down on that finance is quite another. So as has been mentioned, a revenue neutral sort of stamp duty kind of incentive of some sort has been talked about for many years, would be a really good way of driving consumer demand, but also linking this through to value in the home buyer market. And the Green Finance Task Force actually has come up with some really clear and quite simple recommendations, quite specific, about how government can help incentivize through short-term policies and triggers the green finance that's ready to come in. So the last thing I'd say really is a plea that we don't just, clearly our biggest challenge is the 29 million or so homes out there which are already standing, virtually all of which are going to need some kind of energy uplift to reach our net zero target. But we mustn't forget that nearly 2 million other non-domestic buildings that also represent some 17% of our national emissions. And we also need to urgently improve the energy efficiency and carbon intensity of our new buildings, newly constructed buildings, because we're still building, building new to standards that will need us to retrofit in a few years' time. So I'll leave it there, but look forward to the discussion.
Thanks for that, Jill. Again, plenty for us to come back on there. Tom, could I ask you to say opening remarks for a few minutes as well, please?
Thank you. Why don't I start with the question that Mike asked, which is a really important question, which is, why have we failed? Because the case for this has been very solid for a very long time. And I think there are two reasons for that. One reason, again, he put his finger on, we've been missing the mechanism to bring together the capital seeking revenues and the projects, as it were, seeking capital. And that's which he described as being there in Germany and not being here in this country. So I do think the calls that are now coming from a number of places for a green infrastructure bank to be part of the recovery is really important part of being able to deal with that question of why have we failed. And I think a second clue to why we failed is actually really in the hands of politicians, and it was given, at least according to the FT, in Dominic Cummings's comment on why he was, or at least why he resists energy efficiency as a priority for the recovery, because it's boring. And I think that I think there has been a real sense of that it's not got the big monumental things that make headlines that's attractive to politicians. And so seems to me something important about the political discourse on this, as well as the policy discourse, because it's quite clear to me we've been much better at the policy than we have at the politics. And if I look at the challenge that faces us to deal with the recovery, we have to do two really important things very fast. We have to restore purchasing power to people, otherwise the economy won't get started. And we have to, if we're going to pay off the debt that we've built up, we've also got to increase our productivity. And in that sense, a national energy efficiency plan gives us a triple whammy, because it not only puts incomes, because there's massive numbers of jobs, and you can take your pick about the number of millions from the various studies that are out there, but it's a very large number of very quick jobs that put wages back into people's pockets, which means there's something to spend. But not only that, it reduces bills as well, as Julius just pointed out. It reduces bills. So you get a double whammy on the purchasing power, but it also reduces bills to businesses, which means you're encouraging the increases in productivity that we need if we look for the longer term and the need to deal with the debt that we're going to build up to deal with this. So I think that we need to get the political narrative on this right, as well as getting the policy narrative on this. And as has been pointed out, there is no question that if you want to, either for the economy or for the climate, this is what gives you the biggest bang for your buck, and it does it quicker than anything else you could do. Now, we've seen the government's pretty committed to the green recovery. Prime Minister said it the other day, it's in the manifesto, as was pointed out. Well, we've seen the headlines, but we haven't seen the money yet. I think 80 million pounds was not what anybody would think is other than a joke in relation to improving energy efficiency. So the key test about whether the government is willing to walk the talk on this and live up to the headlines it's already got is whether or not we see some of the billions Julie referred to in the Chancellor's statement next week. There's a very clear test. And two groups of people will be watching that. The first group of people watching that will be other governments that we are supposed to be leading and the COP26 process to see whether we really are willing to walk the talk. And secondly, all those people out there now who are beginning to put together indices about the recovery spend, about whether it's green or brown, using the kind of taxonomy that's coming up, coming out of the EU, and the whole sort of impetus created by the bank. So I think there's a real moment now which the government, in a sense, is going to see whether it passes or fails on this question. And in terms of lessons learned, the lesson, I think, particularly as Mike was right, a lot of the tools to do this are already there. There are more to be added, but there are a lot of tools already. The lesson I can learn from the COVID experience is you do a lot of this a lot better if you involve local governments. If the M9 group is more centrally involved, if we think about delivery through local government. Because the one thing I'm sure about after COVID is that local government's likely to be a bit more trusted than national government in terms of delivering real outcomes, and in terms of engaging people with what their part is in delivering the benefits to be got from a national energy efficiency plan. So more of it in the hands of local government, please.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And I'll ask for an initial opening contribution from our final panelist, which is Ross Armstrong of OneWorks.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk today. I think I'll come to this from a slightly more practical delivery point of view to talk a bit about what OneWorks is already doing. I think other panelists have already made the case very, very clearly as to why a national energy efficiency strategy makes sense. I think what I'll try and do a little bit is talk a bit about how it can be delivered and actually is being delivered. Obviously, I'll come to it from the Scottish context and talk about what's being done across Scotland. But I think there's hopefully a lot of lessons in there and a lot of things to take away that can go into the wider discussion about what a scalable national energy efficiency strategy would look like. So a bit about OneWorks first. Our role is to deliver a scheme that's called Warmer Homes Scotland. It's a field poverty scheme delivered to all parts and all local authorities in Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Government. So we are centrally funded through taxation and we're accountable to the Scottish Government in a direct contractual straight line. And that's important. I'll come back to that later on in terms of what that means for standards, accountability and transparency. As a field poverty scheme, its primary aim is to reduce bills and to keep people warm in their houses and give them the comfort and the reassurance that they can be affordably warm in their houses. The scheme's funded by the Scottish Government to the tune of between 25 and 30 million pounds a year, and we will help and assist in the region of about 5,000 households a year. The scheme's been running since 2015. And is very successful in terms of its ability to treat customers as individuals and treat households as individuals. And that, I think, is the first lesson that I would kind of just stop on, which is scale is important because the numbers that we're dealing with here are very, very big, and everyone knows that we can't afford to go slowly with energy efficiency. But at the same time, properties are not just made of bricks and mortar. People live in houses and people have different circumstances, people have different needs. And when prescribing the prescription of energy efficiency, we have to treat people as individuals and recognize that every household is different. So the first lesson, I think, is that nexus of the building is one element, the household and the people in it are another. And I think one of the things that Warmer Homes Scotland certainly is focused on is the ability to deliver solutions that work on an individual level. Just to give some numbers and a bit of colour to the points that have already been made very capably by others about jobs. Warmer Homes Scotland's been running for 5 years. We've created over 500 jobs across Scotland. We've created or sustained or made possible almost 150 apprenticeships, and that's in future-facing technologies like renewables as well as gas and some of the standard normal trades. So the jobs and the apprenticeships in the supply chain is not just a nice to have, or we could theoretically do this. It's being done. This is happening under the Scottish Government's watch north of the border now. On average, we've saved the households that have been through the scheme between £300 and £350 per year. Now, all of the caveats apply to that average, or it is an average, and it is based on model data. So treat it with caution, but that's still a good chunk of change in terms of putting money back into people's pockets, which is the point that Tom just made about what that means for economic stimuli and things like that at the same time. One of the things, just to kind of, I thought about what would I condense the lessons learned into, if we're looking at what's being done in Scotland and taking it forward on a national scale across the UK. And for me, I came down to, and it was more by coincidence than design, but I came down to 3 C's. The first is about clarity. Clarity of the target audience is very important. Do we want an energy efficiency program that's about able to pay and about green messaging? Do we want a fuel poverty program that's about reducing bills and putting money in people's pockets and providing affordable warmth? We have to be clear on what it is that we're asking for and what it is that we're driving at, because although there's crossover between those goals, sometimes we have to remember that they will part, and we have to be clear about what we're asking for. The second C is consumer trust and confidence. I think Mike at the start talked about Green Deal, and for my 2 pence, the one area where Green Deal terminally failed was in the ability of consumers to get behind it, have any trust or faith in the quality of what was being installed. And that was partly about routes of accountability. I'm very clear that Warmworks is funded by the Scottish Government. We have a direct contractual line. As a state-funded policy instrument, we're accountable for our quality standards, our consistency, and the way we apply them across the whole of Scotland. There are obviously market-driven policy instruments, some which have been talked about, that perhaps have less of that clarity around consumer confidence and accountability. And the final C is one that Julie talked about, which is about certainty and security of funding. We've got a terrific supply chain in place in Scotland. It's delivered to more than 20,000 households already. But the reason the supply chain's performing well is we said to them at the start that the government was funding a 7-year programme and the funding would be there if they wanted to invest. So the supply chain will definitely come. If you build it, they will come, but you have to give them the security and the certainty that the revenues will be there to invest in jobs and skills and training. So I'll just finish on that and mention that some of the mechanisms that have been talked about by others, home upgrade grants and future schemes and initiatives, and if people are looking to how they should be designed, the lessons and the evidence are very clear that they're tangible, and we're happy to share them.
Okay, Ross, thanks very much for that. I think it's a good way to finish the opening remarks, just actually hearing about on-the-ground experience, and it obviously gives a flavour of what could happen if we started to see a level of investment that's actually been talked about by other panellists. Can I just start with a question, perhaps yourself, Ross, and also Tom? Tom, I mean, this has come from Tom. You mentioned the governance aspect and how do you get politicians on board, because energy efficiency is seen as boring, but yet the Scottish Government's actually doing their own direct investment. So maybe Ross, if you give a perspective why you think the Scottish Government's managed to engage and why the UK Government hasn't yet, then maybe Tom, if you could follow up on that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll try and very delicately toe the line about comparing what the Scottish Government's done and what the UK Government's done. I'll try not to get into trouble with anyone too much if I can.
You're not into trouble with me.
Yeah, I thought I might not. No, I think there's a number of things that the Scottish Government have done that have created that environment where a scheme like ours can do well and can deliver. And the first is actually the last point that I finished on, which is they provided a clear investment pathway to say that, you know, in 2015, when Warmworks Scotland was launched, they said the scheme would be up to 7 years, up to £225 million worth of investment. So from my standpoint, getting the supply chain ready to deliver from there is more straightforward, because you can encourage people to invest in jobs, in training, in skills and apprenticeships. The other thing that we've been very clear on is trying not to move the goalposts every 5 minutes once that investment has started. You know, once you get people bought into what you're doing and how you do it, I think it's really important that you maintain that. I mean, politics is politics, and changes are inevitable to a certain degree. But I think that clarity and certainty of purpose is really important if we're going to create a platform in which people are encouraged to invest and see this as something that they can grow a business within the long term, we can provide skills and jobs in the long term, and we can make economic differences to what Tom mentioned earlier, to the lives of people who are struggling. We can make long-term economic impact through the savings that we get, because energy efficiency savings, you know, the measures that we install are 25, 30 years. Some of them, those savings on bills are long-term sustainable savings.
Okay, thanks. Tom, you want to offer a view just about the different engagement?
Sorry, I've got something. Sorry,
That's you, you're off mute now.
Yeah, I've got messages. I think there was, for a very long time, there was deep skepticism in the Treasury, and who somehow thought that this wouldn't deliver value and it wouldn't work and there'd be a rebound effect. There were all kinds of theoretical problems in the mind of the Treasury economists that have turned out to be not justified. And we've seen a shift in the Treasury's position. The Treasury bays are now quite strongly in favor of this kind of investment institutionally, seeing it as infrastructure investment. And I think that shift in the conceptualization of this as infrastructure has helped to reduce some of that barrier. But you then run into the thing that I picked up from the FT, and I've heard elsewhere, about the sort of obstacles in number 10 now to making this a priority for cash, which is the idea that it doesn't get you very big headlines. And I think that I can understand why the politicians in government can see that as a problem, which is partly why I think it really matters to put the delivery of this with local politicians who are much closer to the people, and therefore, in a sense, both, it's a much more attractive proposition for them politically, but also they're trusted and they can get that kind of consistency of approach that's come through constantly of what you need to make this work. But at the end of the day, you know, you have to understand that headlines aren't outcomes, and you've got to be focused on getting the right outcomes, not just on getting the right headlines.
Okay, Julie, you want to come in there?
Just to echo the point on local government, and we're working with a number of cities actually, many of whom, as we know, local authorities and cities have declared their own climate emergencies and have quite aggressive decarbonisation targets of their own, and indeed there's quite a lot of competition between cities here in the UK and further afield. So we're working with a number of different cities on a project which we called Accelerator Cities, specifically on retrofit strategies, home retrofit strategies across the cities, and really using these consistent methodologies and approaches, coming up with shared policy, playbooks, exploring the funding opportunities that are available to them. And actually, there's quite a neat marriage there with this sort of the green finance that's coming through, and the need to do some of this at scale. So I think there is appetite. There is a trusted kind of almost a better agent, if I can call it that, between the sort of installers and consumers, and perhaps a more effective delivery vehicle for some of this at a place-based level.
Okay, and just as a follow-up to that, Julie, is it not still come down to finance though? So obviously you're working with some cities in areas that are managing to access their own finance packages, but if you look at the UK as a whole, if you look at different regions and different nations, if there's not central funding, it becomes very difficult for these at a lower local level to be able to actually deliver these programmes. Is that not still the issue, the reliance on the Treasury?
There definitely is a reliance on central government funding, hence the need to accelerate some of that has already been committed. The 9 billion that's already been committed is nowhere near enough to, in comparison to the costs that have been modelled, if you like, to get us to all homes reaching an energy performance certificate of C by 2035. We need a lot more than that. So we need both central government funding, absolutely matched by private capital and sort of private investment, and then some creative delivery models at both local and national levels to actually deploy some of that. I am very heartened by the appetite amongst the private markets in particular around green finance and the growth of green finance, and actually seeing buildings as a very obvious first opportunity for the deployment of such products and services. And I mentioned the work of the Green Finance Institute. We've been involved with the Coalition for Energy Efficient Buildings and the various ideas coming out of that, with very diverse stakeholders sitting behind that, ready and willing to start piloting and demonstrating how this could be done from from the finance perspective, but it clearly needs a stronger policy steer and a longer term sort of clarity in order to really start mobilising that at pace.
Okay, thanks. Jill, just to come back to yourself, obviously you spoke about the need for standards of buildings to improve, so that we're not, like for new builds, so that we're not constantly in a cycle having to do retrofit. Now, the Committee on Climate Change, they've suggested in their progress report that the future home standards should be developed by the end of 2020. But yet in a parliamentary question answer I got back yesterday, the government's still saying they plan to introduce the future home standard by 2025. So what do you think is a realistic date that future home standards should be implemented and then actually be live in terms of that's what's the standard that homes need to be built to?
I think I absolutely would agree. It definitely needs considerable strengthening. One of the issues that we would be concerned about is it has downgraded the importance of the fabric energy efficiency standard, which was which is absolutely crucial to us achieving, if you like, a true net zero goal. In terms of the timing, current consultation for it is not until 2024. So clearly we would be pushing for that to come forward really almost now, in order for implementation and kind of compliance with the standard to come through a lot earlier. And I would emphasize that in many of the projects that are at planning stage now, or indeed many of the sort of new homes that were announced at the PM speech on Tuesday, aren't being built yet to many of these standards and will be on site within the next couple of years. So we absolutely do need to bring that much further forward. And the last thing I'd say on the standard is the enforcement regime will need to be significantly strengthened if it's to have the teeth that it needs to have, because the sort of compliance and enforcement piece go hand in hand. So yes, absolutely would want to bring it forward as early as possible, with consultation far sooner than 24. Okay,
thanks. Michael, I've just come to yourself for a question as well. Now, as an opposition politician, I'd rather I like to stay in the theme of putting the boot into the government, as it were, but just with respect to yourself, just to ask, you mentioned the eco scheme and you mentioned that being oversubscribed, but is there more that the energy suppliers could be doing themselves in terms of promoting and implementing energy efficiency?
Well, I'm a great believer that yes, energy suppliers should be promoting energy efficiency. I was asked in the past about why a company that sells energy would want to sell less of it. And the reason for that is very straightforward, that we do not see ourselves as purely a supplier of energy. We see ourselves as a partner for customers, which means helping them use energy in a better way, even produce their own energy through things like solar PV, batteries, and helping them to navigate their way through the zero carbon transition. And that's fundamental to our purpose. So it's not just about stacking them high and selling them cheap. It's about getting the right kind of energy service for our customers. And energy efficiency is a fundamental part of that. We've built a fantastic relationship with the supply chain through the eco scheme, and we can turn on the tap quite quickly, actually, if we need to do this. And I think this is one of the things where, because we have that momentum and we have that experience, we can move very, very quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, the eco scheme is not perfect. There are a number of flaws in it, and I think I won't rehearse them all now. My only point about eco was it's a mechanism that already exists and can be ramped up very, very quickly in response to the challenge we have now in front of us. But I think over the longer term, as I said, I think the targeting of fuel poor households is critical. Eco is one mechanism, home upgrade grants is another. But getting the able to pay is also fundamentally important. And can I just come back to the point about energy efficiency being boring? I think that has been true in the past. And so the question is, how can we make it more sexy, so to speak? One of the things I noticed if you go back 2 or 3 years, solid wall insulation, external cladding was part of eco. It's now been disallowed on grounds that the carbon savings are not enough. Now, whether you agree with that or not, the fundamental point is when you do the external wall insulation. I remember a lady, she had a terraced house in Mansfield where we did a number of pieces of work for us. And we also asked her neighbours at the time, would you like the same work? And most of them said, no, we're not interested. Once she's had the external insulation put on, her house looked fantastic. She was proud as punch, and she said a number of the neighbours came up and were asking, "Oh, how can we get this done?" Unfortunately, we'd moved on by then. The point being, though, when people can see the difference and not just feel the difference in their energy bills, but see something tangible, which they feel is adding something to the value of their property, and they can tangibly see it, it really helps to drive the interest. And that's one of the problems with energy efficiency. It's invisible generally. If you make it visible and you make it attractive for consumers, you make it much more likely they will buy into it and get more headlines.
Okay, thanks. Tom, you're wanting to come in that as well?
I just want to build a bit on what Mike's saying about the positioning of an electricity supplier, and also a bit about how to make this. It's not boring. This is not boring to people. It is often boring to politicians, was really my point. The whole sort of forward momentum of digital economy, which is part of what we're trying to recover, means that over time, the business model of electricity providers is going to shift away from being a commodity supplier in order to be much more of a service supplier, in which that kind of choice doesn't emerge. So it's going to be much more like Netflix, where you pay, as it were, for access to a whole range of services supplied by people. And that's a much more exciting kind of prospect to drive that forward. And I think that's quite important to bear in mind, that the digital economy will transform the way in which we look at this issue and transform the business models of companies like Mike's. And it was really interesting and encouraging to hear that that's the kind of way Mike is thinking about their future.
Okay, thanks. Obviously, I've taken a few liberties as chair, asking a few questions. We do have two other MPs that's joined us, Celine Saxby and Bim Afalami, who's the chair. So Bim, I'll hand over to you if you've got questions you want to ask.
Yeah, and apologies for coming in slightly late. My view, first of all, is that, at risk of speaking for the entire race of politicians, it's not that politicians don't find it interesting. It's that there's a perception that individuals don't find it interesting. And I was very, very struck by what was just said about the visible difference that could be made. I think that's a very, very good point, and it's one I'll be taking to my colleagues in government. I think it's a really, really important point and should be conveyed more. But my question is this. I wondered who might want to take on the question of, we have a skills issue in this country. That's not news to anybody. I am very focused on the practicalities of, regardless of whatever the policy announcement is, regardless of how much money there is, practically, do we have the people and materials to do this in a reasonably quick time frame? And exactly how might that work in terms of scaling up, both in terms of materials and people? And I'm assuming when I ask that question that the financing of it is sorted, because let's not get sort of diverted by the financing, but just the practical way of implementing this. And I was just sort of wondering if anybody wants to take that on, because I think often politicians don't think about practical, but I think it's really, really important.
May I jump in?
Yeah.
I think that it's a really good point, the skills question. And I'm also, as well as being the CEO of E.ON UK, I'm also chair of the Energy and Utilities Skills Partnership, which recently published a report around the skills gap. And there's no doubt about it, there are huge numbers of new skills that we need to teach the workforce in this area, and indeed replace an aging demographic in this workforce. So that's the medium-term problem. The short-term problem, though, is getting people back to work who are either on furlough and may have to be laid off. We've trained 1,000 people for our smart installation in record quick time. Many of them have been on furlough because we couldn't obviously install smart meters during lockdown. We're now ramping that back up again, but it's a question of making sure customers are happy to have people come into their homes, and we're taking all those precautions, but it is taking time. And I already said on eco, the supply chain is there. They're desperate to get their workforce moving again. So I think in the short term, there isn't a challenge. We can ramp up quickly. The workforce is there. The challenge is in the midterm, and absolutely, we're very clear that we need to do a lot more on apprenticeships, although we do have, we make full use of our apprenticeship levy. We have 350 apprentices now training, but we need more in the area of engineering level 3 and 4. That's where the gap is in the apprenticeship. I mean, and we need to change the levy to get more people into training and get a more diverse workforce as well. And I think the basic pieces are in place, but we just need to drive it harder. And but I don't see it as a short-term issue. The short-term issue is getting people back to work. The mid-term issue is fully training the workforce to deliver not just energy efficiency, but the whole of the energy transition over the next 3 decades.
Great, thank you, very helpful.
I think Ross and Jill are wanting to come in that as well, Bam, if you want to make.
Oh, great, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to make the point that, in fact, there was some really interesting research that came out just a couple of days ago by UK 100, and looking at, you know, the number of British workers that are going to need to be reskilled to get us to that net zero carbon target. And it was something like around 2.2 million people. 1 in 10 workers need to be retrained or reskilled. And real estate actually is one of the key critical sectors that's going to be hardest sort of hit by that. But there's kind of 2 ways of looking at that. There's the scale of the challenge, but then there's the opportunity we've got now to actually exactly tackle the issues around furloughing, redundancies, you know, particularly the young workers who are going to, you know, large numbers of young workers losing their jobs as a result of the kind of current economic fallout. And there's a real opportunity to sort of use this moment to accelerate their transition to be able to deliver in those jobs of the future. And you know, the UK 100 have teamed up with many local, 24 mayors, local leaders, calling on the Chancellor to put a new deal for green skills right at the heart of that recovery plan. And I think, you know, that's another one that we can sort of almost achieve a double whammy right now.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, and apologies for kind of going over ground that I've already covered, but the important thing is the investment context for the supply chain. So when we started the program that we run 5 years ago, we went and said, look, this program will go for up to 7 years, and you'll have the clarity and the certainty about what the rules of engagement will be. I think in any other major capital investment program, we would look to say, well, if we want you to invest, we'll give you the certainty of the terms, and we'll give you some degree of clarity around what that's going to look like. And that encourages supply chains to invest in things like jobs and upskilling. Just as a practical example, you know, new technologies, what we talk about when we talk about energy efficiency now is not what we'll talk about in 5 to 10 years' time. Things like heat pumps as opposed to gas boilers, things like more external wall insulation that Mike mentioned coming back to the table rather than the standard loft and cavity wall insulation we've all kind of talked about for years and years. These are the solutions we'll be fitting 5 to 10 years from now. We've already trained dozens of former gas installers on our scheme to become heat pump installers. Mike's not in it. That will be throughout E.ON. They'll have done the same thing. Lots of gas engineers are now air source heat pump installers. And the reason they'll do that, they'll take those skills and do that training and be future facing, is because we give them something at the end of it that's tangible to say, you will have the ability to get into these future facing technologies as well as this kind of production line of what we've always done. People have to have that incentive of, actually, we're providing future facing skills. And if you create the climate of the right climate for investment, the supply chain is full of entrepreneurial businesses. I would echo what Mike said about the eco supply chain. Our supply chain is the same. It's full of entrepreneurial businesses who know how to get people, how to train people, and how to give people the skills to get long-term gains. We just have to create the right climate.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Bam, can I just say, in terms of you said you'd note the positive comments from Michael about how transformational the external cladding can be to properties. So therefore, it's actually a visible bonus as well. I'd invite you to visit my constituency, because my local authority's done a lot of external cladding. Okay, that's social housing, and it really is, when you see it in a large number of properties in an area, it truly is transformational in terms of a visible regeneration of the area, as well as that energy efficiency aspect. So I say, feel free to visit my constituency. I'll give you a guided tour.
I will. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Tom, you're wanting back in. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up quickly, but I'll let you back in.
I was just going to replay really Julie's point. Because of the history with external cladding, there is a real need to build confidence. And that means you've got to have an enforcement mechanism for standards of delivering it. And that's got to be there in a way that people are confident that when they do something that changes their own home, they're not exposing themselves to risk. I think that's quite an important part of the package, along with the skills. So it's not just simply about money and kit. It's also about skills, and it's about a whole system design, not just getting one or two elements of it right.
Okay, thanks for that. As I said, I'm sorry we're running out of time. We're due to finish at 3 o'clock, and whilst there's comments that some politicians find energy efficiency boring, but I'd certainly been happy to talk much longer. I know obviously Bim's got a great interest in it as well. So thanks very much for some fantastic contributions from Ross, Tom, Mike and Julie. Real appreciate your input, and hopefully we do get that major inroads with the Treasury and with number 10, and we actually start to see things make a difference. And thanks again once to Lord Stunnell, who paid tribute to Diana Maddock at the start as well. A big thanks to Theo and PRASEG for organising the event. So hopefully it's been very useful for everybody that's tuned in, and thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.